The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Network Collective's latest webinar on the topic of how to buy SD-WAN. My name is John Waterhouse. I'm CEO of the Network Collective, and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone joining knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent network and telecom strategy and sourcing consultancy. We support over 260 major UK multinational companies with transformation of their network and telecom services, covering the full range of commercial, technical, operational and contractual areas of all of their services. So joining me today is our CTO, Craig Northveth. Craig, would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Hello, John. Hello to the listeners. Hi, everybody. My name is Craig Northveth. I'm the CTO here at Network Collective, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing our insights and experiences on what continues to be a very hot topic today.
Right. So before we get stuck into the meat of the webinar, just a couple of housekeeping points. So we're going to be very strict on sticking to the 20-minute timetable. Everyone joining will have access to a recording of the webinar afterwards, and we will try to respond to as many questions as possible as we go through and at the end. But any questions we don't get a chance to respond to, we will answer on email afterwards. Right. So if we there we go. Hopefully everyone can see the next slide. So the purpose of today's webinar is to evaluate the question of why an organization might want to deploy SD-WAN. As Craig said, this is one of the absolute hottest topics in the network industry. In fact, it probably is the hottest topic in the network industry right now. So we really want to drill down into why organizations are looking at SD, what are the drivers for SD, and critically, how is SD best procured? So, as always with our webinars, what we're really looking to do is bring serious focus into the realism, the viability, the actual real-world benefits of this sort of approach. So we're going to tackle three key questions on the webinar. So first of all, what are the main drivers for SD-WAN? How to build a business case for SD-WAN, and what are the main sourcing models for SD? Now, for a bit of background, as I think everyone knows, and TNC leads more procurement processes in the network and telecom space than any other consultancy, and that is particularly the case with SD. We've been working in this area for a number of years now, and we're extremely widely exposed. So we've really been able to collate an awful lot of insight into what's actually going on and trying to really get underneath the hype in this particular area. Critically, TNC is entirely vendor independent, so we aren't trying to persuade anyone to buy SD-WAN or to buy for a particular service provider. We'll try and really reflect on what's happening in the market and strip out all the sales and marketing messages from that. So that's all the background. Let's get into the analysis. Craig, looking at this first slide, can you talk us through what you see as the main drivers organizations are finding for SD-WAN?
Yeah, sure, John. So I think what we're trying to show here is we're starting to see some real clarity around what organizations are looking for when they're considering SD-WAN as a possible solution. So if you look on the right-hand side here, kind of three of the key top drivers. Ability to utilize multiple WAN providers. Now, a couple of reasons for this. Reach and flexibility is probably one of the key reasons. Ability to potentially use different technologies as well, looking at maybe more internet services, cellular services even in the future. Having that choice of more than one provider and being able to utilize lower cost services, better performing services, higher bandwidth services. So, that's one of the key drivers. The second one we're looking at there is looking at increasing reliability of existing Mpls VPN. So there's a big misconception typically or generally in the market around SD-WAN is a direct replacement for Mpls. What we're actually seeing most organizations deploying SD-WAN doing is they're supplementing it as an Mpls service. So they may be adding SD-WAN capabilities to improve visibility, improve performance and optimization of their MPLS networks, and maybe access to cloud via local internet connections. So they're using it as a supplementary service, not always as a direct replacement service. So that is one misconception that we hope to clear up during the call today as well. And the third kind of drive, the key drive there, is that, you know, in line with many organizations' cloud-first strategies, being able to optimize connectivity to cloud platforms. So SD-WAN's playing quite a big part in enabling that for organizations to deliver that direct access, so not backhauling MPLS networks, not trying to find regional or global breakout points, but being able to create virtual network connectivity directly into the cloud platform. We've got a couple of kind of key use cases there. So we've touched on the supplement or potentially direct replacement of MPLS in some cases. A couple of the other big key use cases around the uniformity and standardization of the network as a whole. So many challenges organizations have today is around actually understanding the configuration that's deployed across the network, ensuring that it's standard, ensuring it's uniform, ensuring it's a single policy that can be applied and orchestrated from a central point of view, and moving down more into kind of the visibility and management of the network as well. One of the big struggles in traditional networks is being able to get that central visibility, be able to orchestrate the network from a single point, and really being able to kind of drive it based on policy rather than single configurations distributed across the network. And then the final point there is around kind of remote diagnostics capabilities. So again, taking the visibility, taking the management, being able to make more dynamic changes to the network to improve performance, to improve throughput, to improve ultimately customer experience whilst utilising the network.
Just a quick question on this. One of the things I'm sure lots of people listening are going to be sort of shouting at the screen at this moment is, what about cost savings?
Yes.
Is cost saving the big driver for SD?
So historically, absolutely, it has been. You know, if we look back 2 years, 12 months even, the big marketing drive around SD-WAN was 60% cost reduction on your MPLS costs. You know, take out lots of cost and deliver a more streamlined, simpler network. The truth of the matter is we've just not seen that being delivered at all from any of our customers. In reality, organizations that have supplemented SD-WAN alongside MPLS have actually taken a cost hit. So we're not saying that cost savings cannot be delivered. They can, and we'll look at that in the next slide when we talk about the business case. But the big figures that some of the vendors do talk about are just not achievable. We're just not seeing it in the market, and that's going on, you know, real buying behaviours of our customers. So it's moving away from the marketing hype into what is actually real. So that's been less of a driver these days.
So in other words, is it fair to say that the real world drivers for SD are around what it enables the network to do, what it enables organizations to do with the network? It's not primarily a commercially driven purchase.
No, so it could be classed potentially as cost avoidance. So you're driving more bandwidth, improving visibility, control of the network, being able to utilize more access circuits rather than an active passive type of configuration. You could argue the fact that you're avoiding spending money on more MPLS bandwidth by doing something different, but the actual driving out cost, unless you go to you know, a localized broadband model with lots of complexity and poor SLAs and poor performance from an underlay perspective, it's very difficult to save any money.
Very interesting. Right, we should probably jump onto our next slide then. So we're dancing around the topic of business case. So talk us through how you're seeing organizations tackle the business case and what we're seeing being successful from a business case perspective.
Yeah, so I think the business case aspect is very important, and it's often a step that we see in some organisations not consider. So we do see, we have CIOs, CTOs, head of networks, even procurement people coming to us and saying, right, we need to buy SD-WAN, without actually considering some of the implications from a business case perspective. So when we're talking about business case, we're looking at, well, what are the costs, where's the ROI, what change is going to be involved, where are the risks, etc. So we are seeing that organisations that do start developing this business case at the front end start looking at, well, what is the level of technology change? Do I need to consider new skills, new capabilities? What does it mean in terms of how I manage my vendor ecosystem? Am I going to move from a single global managed service provider to 20 local providers, and maybe an SI or a specialist network as a service provider providing an overlay? Clearly, that's quite a significant change and an impact in terms of how an organisation would operate. But also then, at a further level, looking at the operating model change, looking at the hierarchy of the organisation, SD-WAN potentially can deliver lots of technology convergence. So we could see network and security stacks being combined or rationalised into a single solution. That clearly has an impact on current hierarchies within organisations where they may have a separate network and security team. How is that brought together? Does that affect people's roles? So the business case creation bit is really around validating the requirements in the first instance to say SD-WAN is a suitable solution, but then fully understanding the level of change and transformation that may be required to actually execute an SD-WAN strategy.
And that's very interesting. So if I understand what you're saying correctly there, obviously there's a technology change with SD, and of course that's what everyone talks about, thinks about. Whenever we talk to organisations about SD-WAN, they're viewing it as a technology thing. And your point around people often think, am I going to buy Mpls or am I going to buy SD? Organisations are often seeing those two things as either or, but effectively, as it were, like-for-like replacement. Whereas actually your point is, because of what SD-WAN enables, it's not only that it's not a like-for-like replacement, it's probably a supplement and a complement to traditional services, but actually to get the benefits out of it, you need to make much wider change within your organization in terms of potentially personnel, skills, how you're organized, your operating model, etc., etc. So it's a much wider change than many organizations understand when they go into it.
Yeah, and largely that's where some of the cost savings will come from. So, we do talk about trying to drive that kind of cost saving approach, but from the processes that we've been involved in, from the kind of end-to-end transformation process we've been involved in, we typically find that the end state is more around cost neutral, and a lot of the changes in the cost movement effectively doesn't always come from the technology. Some of it will do. Some of it will mean moving from Mpls to internet services at lower cost. But other elements of cost reduction will come out of the ability to rationalise the operating model, do things differently in terms of service management charges with the service providers delivering the capability. So it is a complex algorithm of developing that business case to actually get even to cost neutrality.
And presumably, whoever's driving that business case development within an organisation is going to need an awful lot of engagement and support and buy-in from colleagues. I mean, you picked out security as an example. One of the benefits, for example, out of an SD solution is you can potentially bring together network and some elements of wider security into a single platform. But presumably, whoever's developing that business case is going to need the buy-in and the support of the security organisation to achieve that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. Okay, conscious of time, so if we just skip on to the next slide. Okay, so I think up until now we've been talking about SD as though SD were a single solution that's always bought and sold and delivered in a single way. But of course, that isn't the case. And I know from the projects we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, there's a very large number of ways in which organizations can tackle SD, can deploy SD, etc. Do you want to, I think you could probably talk us through this matrix, and hopefully that will help to articulate what some of those different approaches are.
Yeah, so at a very high level, because there is complexity around this as well, but at a very high level, we've got the kind of core components of what we would class as an SD-WAN on the left-hand side. So the network underlay would typically be the access circuits, whether they be Mpls, internet, cellular, satellite, whatever the technology. The underlay is the physical aspect of the network. The network overlay would be typically the SD aspect, of the software-defined aspect of it, the orchestration, the virtual networking overlay capability, maybe some security capabilities in there as well. And then the final element is the management piece. So how is it orchestrated? What's the service management wrap around it? What's the change management wrap around it? Kind of all of the ITIL driven service management aspects. So they're the kind of core components. I guess across the top here, what we've got is the approaches that customers take. So maybe sort of 2 years ago to maybe a year ago, do it yourself was probably the only option available. So organizations were going and buying local circuits, cheap local internet circuits, and effectively deploying an off-the-shelf enterprise solution, SD-WAN capability, and managing that in-house. That was the way they was delivering SD-WAN. It's quite popular, primarily because there wasn't many other options on the table at that time. What we found with...
So it's fair to say, Craig, that most SD deployments today are still that model, simply because that's what historically people have been doing.
Yeah, I mean, we've probably got some stats on that actually, which will be interesting to share maybe in the future. But yeah, I would say that's probably the case. And we hear about varying different outcomes from that process. Some think it's fantastic because they've got the capability to manage it in-house, and it's very dynamic, and their speed to market's a lot better, and they've got a global capability potentially to manage the vendors on a local basis. Others that have done it are regretting it because it's very difficult to manage. It's complex to control. The SLAs are very poor. They don't necessarily speak the language in all the countries where they source services from, and they're struggling as a result. So there's pros and cons to that model for sure. I think the focus now, and again, most of the customers that we talk to, typically they would be looking for more of a managed wrap around SD-WAN. So we're starting to see certainly the managed service providers, so traditional telcos, but increasingly service integrators as well. So the traditional service integrators are out there offering and productizing SD-WAN capabilities. So the managed service providers primarily will be offering their selected vendor SD-WAN solution. So that could be a Viptela or a Velo Cloud type solution. The SIs take a slightly different approach. They would be aligning to what the customer requirements are, so maybe more of a best of breed type approach, and then they can knit it all together. So providing that almost like DIY outcome, but as a managed service. And then the kind of final model, which is certainly increasing in popularity, and we probably class as quite disruptive to the traditional market, is the network as a service provider. So various different terminologies for these guys: asset-light providers, virtual network providers, providing a managed SD-WAN global service. Some of which will also provide connectivity. Others don't. Others just provide the core platform. So we are seeing quite a lot of change in the market, lots of different approaches organizations can take, and then that comes back to the key point around defining what the business case is, what are the requirements, what are your objectives. Do you want to take some more control in-house, or do you actually still want to continue with a managed service? How agile do you want that to be? Are you happy with taking the default offering, or do you want to be able to select best of breed? So there's quite a bit of complexity, and it comes back to the defining the business case and understanding what the strategy needs to look like to deliver SD-WAN.
And presumably, again, this comes back to the business case that, for the sake of argument, if you want to, if there's very little technical or IT capability in an organization, the do-it-yourself approach isn't going to work, or if you go down the do-it-yourself approach, you're going to have to fund the additional headcount and resources to enable that, which of course will make the solution more complex. Just one other question on this, Craig. I'm conscious we should then hop on to the next slide. presumably we're seeing a bit of a mix and match within this. One example that stands out to me, for example, the SI approach.
Yeah.
I know that there are some organisations where the SI is delivering the SD and is buying and sourcing the circuits as well, delivering that kind of full stack. In other cases, customers are buying their own circuit and the SI is delivering the SD overlays. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we're seeing that as an increasingly attractive model for some customers, because it's back to one of the drivers really. If you're with a single telco, for instance, then your choice around the SD-WAN technology is limited, and potentially the reach is limited as well. Whereas an SI has got a little bit more flexibility around their approach to procure services through multiple providers on your behalf. So we are seeing that as being quite not, I wouldn't say innovative, but a new approach to the market, which again is allowing organisations to consider an alternative to the telco.
I presume as well. Certainly, I hear from customers they quite like the idea of having the SD layer delivered by someone other than the people who are delivering the transport, because it gives them control. Hey, when I want to switch off an Mpls link and switch on an internet link, I don't want to have an argument with my service provider.
Yeah.
So they quite like having that split of I buy underlay from these guys, overlay from these guys, and that gives me the control over the environment.
Yeah, and if you look on one of the models there, the network as a service provider model, and the network management aspect of it, that mix of in and out resources is becoming more common as well. So because you get in the centralized orchestration capabilities that the SD-WAN delivers, and it becomes less of a configurational task, hard coding CLI config and that kind of stuff, more to a drag and drop policy driven type approach. Actually bringing that in-house is less of a risk than what it used to be, but you're driving lots of agility and flexibility in the network overall.
Very interesting. Right, I'm conscious we better skip on to our final slide because time is pressing on and we're already slightly over our 20 minutes, having said we'd be strict on it. So Craig, summarize it for us. What's our overall view of SD right this minute?
So right this minute, I think we're not under any illusion that SD-WAN is not going to be around for a long time. So SD-WAN is likely to become the default model. Whether we start calling it WAN again or we still refer it to as SD-WAN, I don't know. But I think the way the technology is developing, the roadmap of all the suppliers, everything's pointing to the direction that SD-WAN will be around for a long time and will largely become a default model. I think, as we've seen, particularly over the last 12 months, there is still quite an unsettled market. There's been quite a bit of M&A activity. I expect that will continue this year as well. And some of the product sets that are out there, some of the capabilities, even some of the suppliers are relatively immature still, and they're still certainly going through a development life cycle to get the products up to a level where they would be classed as a fully ratified solution that's mainstream, if you like. I think one of the things is not on this slide, but one thing to consider, particularly this year and as we look forward, is the hypergiant risk. So we're referring to the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts of this world. We already know that they're looking at virtual global WAN capabilities, what impact that might have to the market. We've seen impacts it's had in things like the unified comms market with things like Skype for Business. So there is something to definitely keep an eye on there, and look at the risk associated with that and potential opportunities, obviously. But I think the final point from me on this really is, the last bullet there is that we are almost on every global WAN strategy that we're working on at the minute, considering SD-WAN as a possible outcome. I suspect, and I think this is quite a strong suspicion, is that the number of conversions from Mpls or traditional networking, should we say, managed service provider networking to SD-WAN will increase this year. So I do think that, some organizations will definitely start saying, well, right, let's start planning our network transformation to SD-WAN this year, and let's look at what that roadmap needs to look like, what activities we need to carry out in the next 12 to 18 months to actually get to an end state where SD-WAN is the default product.
Great, that's extremely interesting. We've had quite a few questions in. I'm going to pick one out because it's a topic we haven't quite touched on at all, and then we're going to have to wrap up. The question is SD-WAN something organizations should be considering enterprise-wide? Does every, is SD-WAN a kind of either or, every site has it or no one has it? Or actually are organizations using SD in specific situations at specific sites in specific geographies within a wider network that may not be SD enabled?
I think the simple answer to that is a mixture of both. So we certainly have organisations that have utilised SD-WAN capability for point solutions, for quick wins, where they need a level of rapid deployment or dynamic networking capabilities, but they've left some of their core infrastructure, maybe it's their global backbone, connecting data centers, etc., on an Mpls network, because it's the guarantees that they get with that platform. Obviously, some organisations that are heavily reliant on voice and video type services, particularly like the law firms and things like that, we see them sticking with a level of Mpls, but also considering how they can supplement that environment with SD-WAN to optimize access to more cloud-based platforms. And we see organizations actually saying, we don't need Mpls anymore. We've moved everything to the cloud. It's all SaaS-based. We want to reduce some costs. We want to deliver a better, more agile network capability, so we'll consider SD-WAN across the board.
Fantastic. Very interesting. Thank you, Alison, for that question. Right, that is indeed all we have time for. Craig, thank you very much, as always, for your insights. And thank you, everyone, for joining. A last quick point from me. Much as we at the Network Collective love talking SD-WAN, and it is one of our favorite topics at the moment, it's not all we do. And we equally love talking about non-SD-WAN, just as much as we love talking about UC and mobile and telephony and all sorts of other things. So if anyone is interested in talking with us about any of those other topics, not just SD, please feel free to do so. And our contact details are on the screen. Right. That is everything. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for listening. Thank you, Craig, for your insights. And we look forward to talking to everyone again soon.